Hey everybody, so this is another episode of Ask Tary, and in today's video I'm going to answer the following question. How come I can understand intellectually that my mother is not capable of loving me, but I can't feel this? Why do I still suffer? So before we get started on answering this question, I'm going to try to keep this video a little bit shorter than normal. I just want to give you a couple heads up. Number one, the Inner Mastery Lab card is open and we're starting on March 23rd. So if you're interested in that program, you want to know more about it, get in touch with me. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer. Or if you're on Instagram, just click on the link in my biography. And if you're on YouTube, then you can find the link in the description of this video. So let's get down to the question. Intellectually, I know that my mother will never be empathetic and loving, just like I needed her to be when I was a child, because she simply doesn't have this ability. However, this knowledge doesn't connect with my feeling, and I still cry over the injustices that I went through. How do I start to really feel this, to understand this feeling and move on? What if I'm so conditioned to this lack of love, because it's what I've experienced my entire life, that I simply cannot detach from it? Like, what will become of me when I get over it? I'm afraid. Maybe it's just better to keep things the way they are. How do I let go of the desire for revenge and move on? Wow, that's a powerful question. So I'm going to try to explain it in the most simple way that I can. Every person, when we're born and we come to planet Earth, we're born as streams of pure consciousness. And what we need as babies is for our caretakers to receive us in a loving, responsive, non-intrusive, and non-judgmental way. If we notice that, there's somebody there outside of ourselves, outside of our little baby minds and baby bodies that can attend to our needs, if they're attuned to our needs, they can validate that we have these needs, then what we learn is that the world is essentially a safe place to be. The other thing that we learn by the way that our caretakers respond to our needs is how much value we have intrinsically as people. Now, children don't have enough cognitive development to understand why their parents are always unhappy, for example. So if you had a mother or a father that suffered from depression or that shows some pathological narcissistic traits, children will actually stop loving themselves in an attempt to never lose their parents' love. So if they see that, when they express a need or when they do something, this isn't very well received by their parents. Children depend on their parents for their existence. So they will actually let go of parts of themselves and end up being less like they would be spontaneously in order to try to be closer to that which will get them safety, love, attention, or anything from their parents, right? Now, if you weren't received in a loving, non-judgmental, non-intrusive, and responsive way when you were a child, if on the contrary you were raised by someone who actively used narcissistic abuse against you, and remember the point of narcissistic abuse, according to Sam Vaknin, is that it's a type of psychological manipulation that aims at making the victim feel empty. Right? When you empty yourself of yourself because you're dealing with someone that uses covert and also more obvious manipulation tactics to make you feel as if parts of yourself aren't worthwhile, aren't trustworthy, aren't right in some way, aren't adequate enough, you disown your own inner wisdom, your emotions, you mistrust anything that comes from inside of you. And this is the problem with narcissistic abuse, whether it's your parents who treat you this way, or whether you have a relationship with someone, you're married to someone that has pathological narcissistic traits. The result for you is that you're going to be empty of yourself, and you're going to lose your sense of self, your sense of identity, and your ability to function as an autonomous individual. So great, this is all very intellectual and maybe we can understand it, but how do you actually stop feeling the pain of not having been loved when you were a child? Well, these parts of you that were rejected, that were disowned, that weren't well received, they become kind of like frozen bits of your psyche that still have the same needs. And the weird thing is that we have this habit of going back to that one person who hurt us because we think it's that person who has the power to heal us. And this is all wrong when we're dealing with toxic people who don't have the ability to heal themselves, much less help us on our healing path. And so the only solution is you have to give to yourself that which was not given to you. So for example, you will notice that if you were raised by such parents that do have pathological narcissistic traits, you've grown up seeing yourself in a very distorted way and thinking that you're not good enough, because this is the core wound that we're left with as children of pathological narcissists. And in other words, what this means is that you're treating those parts of you in the same way that you were treated by your parents. And so long as you repeat this treatment of those parts of you, you're still going to relive the trauma of not having secure attachment to your primary caretakers, which is often your mom or your dad or whatever. So really the only way of you correcting that trauma is for you to be actually open to looking at those parts of you that are wounded, that make you feel weak and vulnerable and like you should be stronger and like you should be over this already. So long as you can't look at yourself with compassion, with unconditional love, so long as you can't meet yourself where you're actually at, you will just be perpetuating the same sort of disowning of these characteristics that other people drilled into your mind that they weren't good enough. And in the way that you treat yourself, you keep convincing yourself that this is true. So what does this mean that we have to be open to those disenfranchised parts? Well, I'm going to try to make this a little bit more practical. First and foremost, you need to be able to observe these parts of you that are difficult to look at or that are very painful to feel at a distance. Why? Because when we're identified with these parts of us, then we buy into the idea that we're these distorted creatures that aren't good enough, are never going to heal, or never going to be, autonomous adults. And so long as you're identified with that identity, there's really no healing that's possible. So what you want to do is you want to create distance so that you can have a relationship with that part of you. If you can't have a relationship with something if there aren't at least two entities or two parts involved. So when you're identified with something and you see yourself as the worthless, whatever, you could be the scapegoat child, or maybe the golden child, the invisible child. As you see yourself as someone who is empty, you really can't have a relationship with yourself because you're identified and you're only one thing. As you can see yourself from a distance, this means that you are in the seat of self, you are nice and calm and grounded, and you can observe that one painful, wounded part of you. It's acting that way. It's got its weird defense mechanisms because it's stuck in the past. It's stuck in some traumatic sort of perception of life. See, when you have two parts that can have a relationship with one another, then you can do that which was not done for you when you were a child. You can receive yourself. Now, the only way of receiving these parts with any sort of mental health at all, or in any sort of way that's going to be healing or nurturing, is if you receive your wounded parts from the seat of self. So the very first step, if you want to stop feeling the need for revenge, and if you want to emotionally feel that it's not going to affect you forever, the fact that your mom or your dad doesn't love you the way that you needed them to, is to be able to at once simultaneously see a wounded part from the seat of self. Can you reconnect to your true self in the middle of the hurricane? That's the question. Now, as you consistently look at these wounded parts from the seat of self, from that endlessly loving, patient, compassionate, grounded place, these parts are going to feel seen. They're going to feel understood. Because see, the thing that we have to understand about our wounded parts is that even though they present themselves as really weird defense mechanisms that in our adult stage can be quite toxic and dysfunctional, they have a positive intent. And once we understand that even our most wounded parts that kind of make us want to really not admit to having those parts at all are trying to protect us from something, we can show them another level of appreciation. And think about it, if you came from a really crappy toxic relationship and that's all you'd ever experienced your entire life, and then you met this one person that could finally see your side of the story and that could show you some appreciation for that, wouldn't you ease up? Wouldn't you feel like it was less of a burden what you went through? So in exactly the same way, we want to appreciate the positive intent of our psychological defense mechanisms. And I'm going to give you a specific example so this isn't so theoretical and it's something that you can actually apply. Let's say, for example, that when you were a kid, you learned that the only way that you could connect with your father was if you were a bully and if you were, really violent and aggressive. You learned that by twinning with him, right, by becoming like his twin, by mimicking his behavior, then he saw himself in you, and then he was able to connect with you because, he would see himself in you, and he's not able to connect to anything that is not him, being a pathological narcissist. So you develop a defense mechanism, you develop a part of yourself that becomes addicted to being a bully and to using violence in order to affirm your own worth, because it's the only pattern of receiving love from your caretakers that you experienced as a child. Now, you may think, well, this is horrible because, it makes me be super aggressive in my relationships nowadays, and I'm abandoned by everybody, and I don't want to be abandoned. I want to have healthy relationships. But if you can take a look at what that wounded part of you has been trying to do for you, it's been trying to get you love and attention in the only way that it knows how. And if you were to ask that part of you, okay, what do you think is going to happen if you stop using this defense mechanism of bullying people and using violence in order to get validation and feel superior? Then this wounded part might tell you something like, are you crazy? If I weren't to be aggressive and dominate every environment that I walk into, then clearly I would suffer public humiliation, and this would be such a shameful experience that I would fall apart. So you can see that from that childish perspective, there's always a positive intent. So some other examples, if you're codependent, well, you learned that an easy way of getting love is to take care of somebody else. And so long as you can find someone who is egocentric, self-centered, right, and who needs a lot of loving and a lot of caretaking, then you always find someone sick that you can cling to and feel that you're having a relationship with. Now, that might get you into really toxic relationship patterns, but if you ask that wounded part of you, hey man, what do you think is going to happen if you stop being codependent? That wounded part, from its perspective, it might answer something like, are you kidding me? There is no love in the world. People are always going to abandon me. If I'm not always taking care of somebody in a selfless way, I'm going to be abandoned every single time. So you can see that from that distorted viewpoint of how life works, there is a positive intent. So seeing your wounded parts from the seat of self, at a distance, not identifying with them, so there can be two of you. You can have a relationship with that part and therefore receive that part in a non-judgmental, responsive, eternally loving way and non-intrusive way. Understanding life from the perspective of your wounded part so you can appreciate it for the positive intent, and actually being able to be like, oh my God, thank you so much for being this workaholic that has made me have no social life over the past 3 years. Maybe it wasn't the healthiest way of dealing with my fear of not being able to survive, but the fact that you kept me on track and working really allowed me to become independent and move away from my toxic family. So there's always a positive intent. And then, of course, as you build a relationship with this disowned part, it can express to you not only what its positive intent is, but what it needs, right? So, for example, I had a part of me that would isolate. I would self-isolate at the slightest sign of any sort of trouble, because one of my core wounds was that I'm just too weird and no one's ever going to choose me to have in their life because I'm just a weird person, and why would you want a weird person? Now, you know, that part of me that would self-isolate now has a different role because I got to know it and because I understood that it was trying to protect me. And really what it was trying to protect me from was from humiliation and from being judged and criticized, and therefore from not having people in my life. Because if I'm being judged, how am I going to want to have a relationship with those people? And now because I can see that wounded part of me without judging it, without being like, I can't believe you're not better socially. Why don't you feel more comfortable? You should be over this already. Now I can actually use that part to guarantee that I pause from working when I've been working too hard, because I work at home, so sometimes I don't see people, and my mental health depends on my seeing people regularly. Because I understand that wounded parts needs, I know that relationships are something that I actively and regularly need to work on and work towards, right? And now I can satisfy my own need of having a social life, a healthy balance between work and my social life, because I was able to get in touch with my shame of feeling socially inadequate and of understanding that my inadequacy and self-isolation were actually defense mechanisms. Okay, so that's the one thing that you want to do. You will stop feeling like what your mother gave you or did not give you is going to make such a difference when you learn how to give yourself, the wounded parts of yourself, those same things. And the other thing is we don't do this all by ourselves. I will consistently tell everybody that is in any sort of healing journey that it is part of our healing journey to simultaneously learn how to give ourselves the things that we need and not depend on outer sources, but also to be able to ask for help when we're actually dealing with a relationship that has the potential for being completely different from what caused the traumatic experiences to begin with. So this is another way of saying that you have some inner work to do that is just going to be between your wounded parts, excuse me, and yourself, your true self. As they relate to one another, they will heal, right? Your wounded part will heal. But there's another part of your work that has got to do with choosing the right people and choosing people to also do for you what your parents should have done. So you want to find people who can truly see you, people who you can be vulnerable around, who you can be naked in front of, you know? You don't have to be strong all the time, or people you can ask for help, or people that are going to have healthy limits that are going to help you understand that you don't need to ask for help all the time. So there's this inner work. We relate to ourselves in a new way from ourself, and we also relate to those wounded parts in a new way by exposing them to people who are going to give us healthier relationships. Okie dokie, guys. Let me know if that made any sense. Let me know if you identified with anything that I said here. And if you want me to answer one of your questions, this video is going to be up on YouTube. Just scroll down to the description. There's a link for where you can submit your question to Ask Tary. And also just letting everybody know that the Inner Mastery Lab is open and we are starting on March 23rd. So there's a week left. And as of March 16th, there's going to be 2 options available. So there's going to be one option with support from me. And then there's going to be another option where you can just get the training modules, and they're at different price points. So one of them might work for you. All right, that's it. That's all I have for you. Guys, have a lovely week.